My wife said, "I think I'm in love with someone else." After 12 years together, she claimed her new soulmate was genuine because he doesn't care about money. Then I hit her with one question: is Caleb going to help pay your dad's bills? She didn't even look up from her phone when she said it. Grant, I think I'm in love with someone else. 12 years. 12 years of building something together. A house in Wash Park, Denver. A financial planning practice I'd grown from a single desk and a laptop to a team of 11 advisors. Her father's medical bills, paid without question every single month for 3 years running. Her sister's wedding, funded by us when her sister's fiancé lost his job. Her graduate school tuition, covered by my business income when her scholarship fell through. 12 years of all that. And she said it like she was reading a grocery list. I didn't yell. I didn't throw anything. I didn't cry. I just looked at her sitting there on the couch we'd picked out together at that furniture store on South Broadway, her thumb still scrolling, and I felt something settle in my chest. Not grief, not rage, something colder and more deliberate than either of those. I said, "Tell me about him." And she did, for the next 40 minutes. Serena told me everything about a man named Caleb Frost, a life coach and wellness entrepreneur she'd met at a retreat in Sedona, Arizona 3 months ago. She'd gone for a long weekend to decompress. She came back with a new crystals collection and apparently a new life plan that didn't include me. Caleb was different. She said, Caleb was present. Caleb saw her. Caleb wasn't obsessed with financial spreadsheets and investment portfolios. Caleb didn't care about money. She actually said that. He doesn't care about money. Grant, he's genuine. He's not like you. And I smiled. Not because I was happy. Not because any part of this was funny. I smiled because in that exact moment a very clear picture formed in my mind. And if you've been through something like this, if you've ever given everything to someone and watched them mistake your reliability for smallness, then you know exactly the kind of smile I'm talking about. It's the smile of a man who realizes the game isn't over. It's just finally, honestly, begun. Before we go any further, if you're new here, hit subscribe. Because what I'm about to walk you through isn't just my story. It's a masterclass in what happens when someone builds their entire life on another person's infrastructure and then tries to walk away from it like it's nothing. Leave a comment below. Have you ever been the one who held everything together while someone else looked for something shinier? I want to hear from you. And if this story hits home, share it. Someone out there needs to hear today. Now, let me take you back to the beginning because to understand what I did after that conversation on the couch, you need to understand how we got there. I met Serena Caldwell at a fundraiser in London, lower downtown Denver, in the fall of 2011. I was 34 at the time. 3 years into building my financial advisory firm, still working 60-hour weeks, but starting to see real traction. She was 29 working as a marketing coordinator for a mid-size events company downtown, and she had this way of commanding a room without seeming to try. Confident, warm, quick with a laugh that made everyone around her feel like they were in on something. We dated for 2 years before I proposed. We got married in a small ceremony at a venue outside of Breckenridge, mountain backdrop, 50 guests, exactly what she said she wanted. I bought our house in Washington Park 4 months later, 3 bedrooms, original hardwood floors, walking distance to the lake, the neighborhood she'd been pointing at in real estate since the first year we were together. I'm telling you this not to catalog my sacrifices. I'm telling you this because it matters for what came later. When someone decides to leave, they have a way of rewriting history. Everything you did becomes either invisible or evidence of your flaws. The house isn't romantic, it's suffocating. The financial stability isn't security, it's control. The reliability isn't love, it's emotional unavailability. Serena started rewriting things slowly about 18 months before the couch conversation. I can see it now with the clarity of hindsight. But in the moment I kept explaining it away. She started going to a yoga studio on Colfax Avenue 3 mornings a week. Fine. She started spending more time with a new group of friends I'd never met, people she described as more aligned with her energy. She started reading books about authentic living and leaving them face down on the nightstand like statements. She stopped asking about my clients, about the business, about the things that had been our shared conversation for a decade. And then Sedona happened. She came back from that long weekend with sunburned shoulders, 3 new linen outfits, and a look in her eyes that told me, before she said a single word, that something had shifted. I just didn't know yet how far the shift had gone. For 3 months after Sedona, she was different, not absent, actually more present in some ways, more conversational, more affectionate, which I understand now was guilt. The affection of someone who is preparing to leave, trying to make peace with themselves before they do the thing they've already decided to do. And then on a Tuesday night in late October, she sat down on the couch, picked up her phone, and said, "Grant, I think I'm in love with someone else." I asked about Caleb Frost calmly. I listened. I asked follow-up questions the way I would in a client meeting when someone gives me information I need to process before I respond. Where did he live, Boulder? What did he actually do, coaching and retreats, mostly online? How long had this been going on? We haven't done anything physical. We talk every day for 3 months. I did the math on that in real time and kept my face completely still. She said she didn't want to hurt me. She said she'd always loved me. She said she thought maybe we'd grown in different directions. She said she felt like she was finally discovering who she really was. I nodded. I said I needed some time to think. She looked almost disappointed, like she'd expected more of a reaction, like the explosion she'd been bracing for hadn't come, and now she wasn't sure what to do with the silence. I went to my home office, closed the door, and sat at my desk for about 45 minutes just thinking. I'm a financial advisor. My entire profession is built on one skill, seeing the full picture before you make a move. You don't react to market volatility. You don't make emotional decisions with other people's futures. You look at the data, you identify the exposure, and you take methodical action. I had been the primary income earner for our entire marriage. My business generated the majority of our household income. The house was mortgaged in both names, but I had made every payment. Her father, Raymond Caldwell, had been battling kidney disease for 3 years. His dialysis treatments, his specialist appointments, 3 hospitalizations, all of it filtered through our joint insurance and supplemented by our joint accounts when the insurance fell short. Serena's car was financed under a credit line connected to our shared financial infrastructure. Her personal credit cards, 2 of them, were linked to accounts I had co-signed. She wanted to leave me for a man in Boulder who didn't care about money. I picked up my phone and opened my contacts. I texted my attorney, Daniel Reyes, at his personal number. Daniel had been my business attorney for 6 years. He knew my finances better than most people know their own. The text read, "Need to talk tomorrow morning. Early. It's personal. Need to discuss separation of joint financial exposure. All of it." He responded within 10 minutes. "I'll be at the office at 7:00. Come then." Then I texted my financial manager, Philip Donahue, who handled the accounts separate from my practice. "I need to review the structure of all joint accounts, credit lines, and shared obligations tomorrow afternoon." I set my phone face down on the desk. Then I went back to the living room, sat down across from Serena, and said, "I think we should talk to a couples counselor before either of us makes any decisions. I'd like to give this a real chance." She agreed. She looked relieved. And the next morning, while she was at her yoga class, I was sitting across from Daniel Reyes on 17th Street, 2 blocks from the Denver Art Museum, going through everything. Daniel listened to all of it without interruption. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and looked at me the way experienced attorneys look at you when they're calibrating how honest to be. "How serious is she?" He asked. "She talks to him every day. She told me she's in love with him. I'd call that serious. And you want to protect yourself. I want to understand my full exposure before she decides to act." Because when she acts, I want to be ready. Daniel pulled out a legal pad, and we spent the next 2 hours going through the inventory. The house, joint ownership. My income had covered all mortgage payments and property taxes for 8 years. The credit accounts, 2 personal cards she carried in her name, but co-signed by me and linked to our joint operating account. Her father's medical coverage. She was listed as a dependent under my business health plan. But Raymond Caldwell's supplemental support came from a joint account Serena had full access to. Her car, financed through a line of credit we'd opened jointly for household expenses. Here's what I want you to understand, Daniel said. You can't remove her from the property deed unilaterally while you're still married. That requires her consent or a court order during divorce proceedings. I know, but you can separate your credit exposure. You can close joint lines. You can restructure accounts. You can make sure that if she decides to run up debt in the next 6 months, you're not holding the bag. That's what I want to start today. Daniel made a list. On one side, the things that required legal process, the property, the formal separation of assets. On the other side, the things I could do immediately and within my rights, closing the joint credit lines she relied on for day-to-day spending, restructuring the household account so that supplemental payments for her father's medical expenses were no longer automatic, and documenting meticulously every financial contribution I had made to our shared life over the past 12 years. One more thing, Daniel said. Her father's medical bills. Is she expecting that to continue? She's never once mentioned it as something she manages. It comes out of our account automatically. I'm not even sure she knows the amounts. Daniel wrote something on his pad and circled it. That, he said, is going to be a very interesting conversation. In the weeks that followed the couch conversation, Serena and I went to 3 sessions with a couples counselor named Dr. Patricia Wang, who had an office near Cherry Creek. I wasn't going because I believed it would save the marriage. I was going because I wanted Serena to believe I was trying and because I wanted a professional record of the state of our relationship that was separate from anything she or her attorney might later construct. Meanwhile, I was building my documentation with the precision I bring to complex financial portfolios. Every mortgage payment organized by date, every tax return, every statement from the years I'd covered her graduate school tuition, the receipts for Raymond Caldwell's hospitalizations, the insurance statements, the credit card balances I'd paid down when she'd overspent. 12 years of financial history catalogued and organized. At the same time, I was listening, not aggressively, just paying attention in the way I should have been paying attention for the past 18 months. Serena began talking about Caleb with less caution as the weeks passed. She'd mentioned things he'd said, ideas he had about financial minimalism and living intentionally. He believed that modern people were enslaved to their mortgages and their careers. He thought real freedom was living lightly without the weight of accumulated obligations. Living lightly. I thought about Raymond Caldwell in his dialysis chair 3 times a week at the Swedish Medical Center on East Hampton. I thought about the monthly statements. I thought about what living lightly was going to look like for a man with kidney disease when his daughter's ex-husband was no longer subsidizing his treatment. I didn't say any of that to Serena. I just listened. One afternoon, coming home from a session with Dr. Wang, Serena said something that crystallized everything. I feel like you've always seen me as a dependent, she said. Like I'm part of your financial portfolio, something to be managed. I pulled into the driveway of our house in Wash Park and turned off the engine. I looked at the house for a moment. The garden she'd planted along the front walkway, the porch furniture we'd bought together, the window in the upstairs bedroom where she'd set up her little reading nook. I've never seen you as a dependent, I said. I've seen you as my partner. But I think we may have very different ideas of what that means. She didn't respond. She got out of the car and went inside. I sat in the driveway for another few minutes. Then I texted Philip Donahue. Begin the account restructuring we discussed. Start with the credit lines. Serena found out about the credit lines on a Thursday. She'd gone to use one of the cards, the one she used for personal expenses, clothing, the yoga studio membership, the occasional dinner with friends, and it had been declined. She called me while I was in a client meeting. I let it go to voicemail. When I called back an hour later, her voice was a pitch I hadn't heard before. Not quite anger, something closer to shock. My card was declined. Grant. What's happening? I closed the joint line it was connected to. I said, I should have told you sooner. I'm restructuring our accounts given where things are between us. It seemed irresponsible to leave everything open-ended. Silence. You can't just do that. I can. Actually, those accounts are in my name. You were an authorized user. I didn't remove you without cause. Serena, you told me 3 weeks ago that you're in love with another man. More silence. What about Dad's bills? What about the automatic payments? And there it was, the question I'd been waiting for. Those came out of the same account. I said, the restructuring affects that, too. I'll send you the documentation so you understand what changes are taking effect and when. I'd suggest you talk to someone, but maybe Caleb, about how to cover those going forward. I said that last part without a single note of sarcasm in my voice. I meant it. I genuinely thought she should talk to the man who didn't care about money about the medical bills of the father-in-law he'd never met, and see what his philosophy of intentional living had to say about that. She hung up. The next 72 hours were the most turbulent of the entire experience. Serena called back that evening in a different register entirely. Quieter. More careful. Clearly having thought through her approach. She said she understood I was hurt. She said she didn't want this to get adversarial. She said she thought we could handle things civilly. I agreed. I said I wanted to handle things civilly, too. I said I'd already retained Daniel to help structure a fair separation of assets, and that I recommended she do the same. She paused at that. You already have a lawyer. I've had a lawyer for years. Serena. His name is Daniel Reyes. You've met him at our company events. When you told me you were in love with someone else, it seemed appropriate to have a conversation with him about what that meant for our financial situation. That's not adversarial. That's responsible. The following morning, her mother called me, Linda Caldwell, a warm, direct woman from Fort Collins who had always treated me like a genuine member of the family. We had a real relationship. Linda and I. She'd called me on my birthday every year for a decade. This call was different. Grant, I need to understand what's happening. She said, Raymond's treatment. We got a notice that the automatic payments were suspended. That's correct. I said, I've begun restructuring our joint accounts given the state of my marriage to Serena. I'm genuinely sorry about the timing. Linda, I want to make sure Raymond is taken care of. I'll cover the current billing cycle while things are sorted out. But going forward, this will need to be handled differently. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, Grant, how serious is this? I think that's a question you should ask your daughter. She said she would. She thanked me. She asked me to please keep her informed. I told her I would. What Linda said to Serena after that phone call, I'll never know exactly, but something shifted. Serena called me that afternoon and asked if we could meet in person, somewhere neutral. I suggested the coffee shop on East Alameda near Washington Park, a place we'd been going together for years. She agreed. We sat across from each other at a corner table with our coffees. And for the first time since the couch conversation, Serena looked like the person I'd actually married. Not the version who'd been coming home from yoga with someone else's energy. Not the version who talked about Caleb Frost like he was enlightenment in human form, just Serena looking tired and a little scared. I didn't understand how much you covered, she said. I know. Dad's bills, the insurance, she stopped. I didn't think about any of that. I know. I said again. That wasn't fair of me. I didn't answer right away. I looked out the window at South Downing Street, at the trees starting to drop their leaves, at the people walking dogs and pushing strollers in that particular way Denver people do on a weekday afternoon. No, I said, it wasn't. But I want to be honest with you, Serena, because I think we're past the point of being kind to each other in ways that aren't true. You told me you're in love with another man. I can't compete with a feeling. I don't want to compete with a feeling. But I also won't pretend that the life we built here just disappears because you found something exciting in Sedona. She looked at her coffee cup. What are you going to do? I'm going to protect what I've built, I said. Fairly and legally. Daniel is working on a full accounting of contributions during our marriage. When we get to the divorce process, and I think we both know we're heading there, I want it to be accurate, not punitive, accurate. And Dad's bills, I've already told Linda I'll cover this cycle. After that, we need a different arrangement. He's not my father-in-law if we're not married. Serena, she flinched at that. Not because I'd said it cruelly. I hadn't. Because it was true, and she hadn't let herself think it all the way through. Is Caleb going to help with that? I asked, genuinely curious. The look on her face told me everything. The man who didn't care about money had not, apparently, offered to cover the dialysis bills of his girlfriend's ailing father. There's a detail I want to add here because it's the kind of thing that only makes sense in context. During one of those 3 sessions with Dr. Patricia Wang, she asked us both a question. What does financial security mean to each of you in this relationship? Serena said it meant not having to worry, that freedom from financial stress allowed her to focus on what actually mattered. Her relationships, her growth, her well-being. I said it meant responsibility, building something stable enough that the people in your life don't have to worry. Doctor. Wang nodded at both of us and wrote something down. I thought about that exchange for a long time afterward, because what Serena described, not having to worry, was real. She genuinely had not worried about money for 12 years. Not once. Not about the mortgage. Not about her father's bills. Not about the credit card balance. Not about the insurance premiums. Not a single time. And she had interpreted that freedom from worry as evidence that money didn't matter, that financial stability was just there, ambient, like air, something she was entitled to rather than something being actively maintained by another person. That's not a character flaw. Exactly. It's a blind spot. But it's a blind spot that costs the person maintaining the system very dearly when the relationship ends, and the other person genuinely cannot understand why the resources are changing. I want to pause here and say something because I've told this story to a few close friends over the past 2 years, and a common reaction is, did you feel guilty? Were you trying to punish her? The honest answer is no, and I want to explain why. Serena was not a bad person. She was a person who had, slowly, and then all at once, decided that the life we'd built together wasn't the life she wanted. That's a human thing. People change. People grow in directions that don't align. I can accept that. What I could not accept, what I think nobody should accept, is the version of events where she walks away from a marriage with full access to financial resources that I built while simultaneously dismantling the thing she walked away from. She wanted to leave. Fine. But leaving meant leaving. It didn't mean leaving while I kept every financial door open and continued paying for her life and her father's life and her personal expenses as if nothing had changed. The restructuring I did wasn't punishment. It was clarity. It was the honest financial picture of what a marriage ending actually looks like when you stop pretending everything is fine. And in some ways, this is the part that surprised me. It was the most loving thing I did in the entire process, because the illusion was over. The pretending was over. And when the pretending stopped, Serena had to look at the real situation with real numbers and make real decisions. Not retreat decisions. Not Sedona retreat decisions. Real ones. The divorce proceedings took 8 months. Daniel was thorough. The accounting of my contributions to the marriage, mortgage payments, the tuition reimbursements, The medical expense coverage, the business income that had funded our entire lifestyle, was extensive and well documented. Serena's attorney, a woman named Karen Diaz, who had an office near the Capitol building, was competent but working with a weaker hand. Colorado is an equitable distribution state, which doesn't mean equal. It means fair, taking into account each spouse's contributions. The documentation we'd built gave us a strong basis for arguing that my financial contributions to the marriage significantly outweighed Serena's, and that the house, in particular, should be handled accordingly. We settled outside of court. Serena would keep the house in Washington Park. It was her primary residence, and she'd lived there longer than anywhere else in her adult life, and I understood that, in exchange, she accepted a significantly reduced claim on my business assets and agreed to a structure around Raymond's ongoing medical support that was time-limited and tapering, transitioning the primary responsibility to a combination of Serena's own income and whatever support structure she was able to build going forward. She signed the papers on a cold morning in March at a conference table in Daniel's office on 17th Street. I shook Karen Diaz's hand. I nodded to Serena. She nodded back. We didn't hug. We didn't cry. We'd done our crying separately, in private, over the previous 8 months. I want to tell you about what happened with Caleb Frost, because the story doesn't end with the divorce papers. Serena had moved out of our house during the proceedings and was living in a rental in the Highlands neighborhood north of downtown. Caleb was still in Boulder. They were, as far as I understood, still together, though she never mentioned him directly during the legal process. Our attorneys handled the communication, and Serena and I spoke directly only a handful of times. About 4 months after the divorce was finalized, Serena's mother, Linda, called me. We still talked occasionally. She'd been clear throughout the entire process that she considered me family regardless of what her daughter had decided, and I appreciated that more than I knew how to say. Linda said, "I thought you should know. Caleb isn't in the picture anymore." I didn't feel vindicated. I want to be clear about that. I felt something closer to sadness, not for myself, but for Serena, who had traded 12 years of real life for something that turned out to be 6 months of retreat weekend energy. "Is she okay?" I asked. "She's figuring things out," Linda said. "Raymond's doing better. The new coverage structure is working." A pause. "She asks about you sometimes. What does she ask? Whether you're okay? Whether you're angry with her?" I thought about that for a moment. Standing in my apartment in the Baker neighborhood of Denver, a 2-bedroom on Bannock Street that I'd furnished simply and quietly with a view of the mountains on clear mornings. I thought about anger. "Tell her I'm not angry," I said. "Tell her I hope she finds what she's looking for." And I meant it. Both parts. I'm going to tell you something that I think is the actual point of this story because I've been circling it for a while and I want to land it clearly. When Serena said Caleb didn't care about money, that he was genuine, that he wasn't like me, she was making an argument that I think a lot of people make without fully understanding what they're saying. The argument is that caring about financial reality is somehow less spiritual, less authentic, less romantic than pretending financial reality doesn't exist. Caleb didn't care about money. That's a fine philosophical position if you're a 23-year-old with no obligations. It's a rather more complicated position when you're a 37-year-old woman with a father on dialysis, a mortgage, and a husband whose income has been subsidizing your entire adult life for 12 years. Not caring about money when someone else is covering all the money is not a virtue. It's a luxury. And luxuries depend on someone, somewhere, doing the unglamorous work of making sure the bills are paid and the insurance is active and the medical expenses are covered and the lights stay on. I was that person for 12 years. I don't say that to ask for a medal. I say it because I think there's a version of this story. The version Serena had told herself, and probably told Caleb in their daily conversations, where I was the obstacle to her authentic life. The financially obsessed husband who just didn't understand what really mattered. And maybe to her, in that version, Leaving me for someone who didn't care about money felt like freedom. What she discovered eventually is what I already knew, that freedom has infrastructure, that the retreat from obligation is funded by someone's obligation, that the man in Boulder who lived lightly had no intention of weighing himself down with someone else's father's medical bills. I don't tell you this to be harsh about her. I tell you this because I think it's important. The most dangerous lie in a marriage isn't infidelity. It's the story you tell yourself about who is responsible for what. Because when that story falls apart, when the credit line is closed and the automatic payment is suspended and the phone call from mum comes in, you find out very quickly what was real and what was philosophy. 2 years after the divorce, I am sitting in my apartment on Bannock Street writing this up, and I want to give you the honest picture of where things stand. My practice is doing well. We moved to a larger office on 16th Street Mall last spring. 11 advisors, a full operations team, a client base that grew 30% in the last fiscal year. I work hard. I still work hard. That's who I am. I have been on a handful of dates. Nothing serious yet. I'm in no rush. After 12 years of building a life with someone, I'm finding it genuinely useful to spend some time understanding what I actually want from the next chapter without the noise of a relationship that had stopped working. Raymond Caldwell is still alive. The new coverage structure is holding. I donated to a kidney disease foundation last year in his name, anonymously. I don't know if Serena knows. I think about her sometimes. Not with bitterness. Just with the particular feeling you get when you look back at something that was real and complicated and ultimately not meant to last. 12 years is not nothing. The house in Washington Park is not nothing. The garden along the front walkway is not nothing. But you cannot build a life on someone's version of you that was never quite accurate. And when someone decides you are the obstacle to their authentic self, the kindest thing you can do for both of you is stop being in the way. She wanted to find herself. I hope she did. I found myself in the process, too. Turns out the man who kept all the spreadsheets and paid all the bills and asked the practical questions that nobody else wanted to ask was never the villain of the story. He was just the one doing the work that made the story possible. And when I stopped doing that work for someone who didn't see it, I redirected it toward building something of my own. That, I think, is the ending worth telling.